Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. The case that I'm going to be looking into today is the stalking and murder of a young woman called Tatiana Tarasoff. And her case would actually go on to change things for the better. Unfortunately, at that point it was too late for her. Basically, somebody knew about threats to her life and never told her about it because of confidentiality issues and just queries around it, and they didn't really know what to do. They did make steps to try and prevent it, don't get me wrong, but the family and Tatiana wasn't actually informed, and you know, it ended in tragedy. Tatiana Tarasoff was born on the 22nd of January in 1949. I have no idea what her parents were called. I could not find it, unfortunately. I did find out that she had a brother, though. Her parents were actually Russian immigrants who moved to Brazil and then to the US when she was 14 years old, and they ended up living in California. By all accounts, her parents were very protective. They had strict rules that Tatiana must follow. They wouldn't allow her to wear things like makeup, you know, and she would be rebellious with such things because she wanted to wear makeup, so she would wait until they would leave and then she would quickly put on mascara, things like that. She would also tell fibs about things because she didn't want to follow their rules, so she would just tell little white lies here and there, basically to appease them, I guess, because they were strict in her eyes and she didn't want to follow the rules that they give out. She was a student at Merritt College in Oakland. Now, despite her parents being very strict, she was actually allowed to go to something called the I House, and this place would have folk dancing lessons, and she was allowed to go there if her brother actually dropped her off and picked her up, took her to and from it, which he did. So she was allowed to go and do that and go and have some fun. In the fall of 1968, in the auditorium of the I House, a young Indian man caught sight of a young Russian woman. She was 18 at the time. His name was Prasenjit Pradar, and I believe he was about 23 at the time. Tatiana caught his eye, and I guess he caught hers in a sense. She said that she thought of him as this very kind man. Prasenjit was born as he was born in India, and he was a member of something called the Dalit, which is classed as an untouchable class group or something like that. Basically a low class of India, not my words, this is just what I found on the internet, a low class of India that would have to really battle against these huge odds stacked before them to be able to do something like he did, to move to the US. He's only one of like a handful of people that ever managed to do it from this so-called untouchable class. And as you can imagine, coming from India and then into US culture was a massive struggle for him. Like, he didn't understand the differences in culture immediately, and he would often spend a lot of time alone in his house just to get away from the noise of everyone else. But with Tatiana, though, he was like in awe of her. Initially didn't have the courage to talk to her, but then eventually he did start talking to her and he began to develop feelings for her. They would begin going out on, like, seeing each other essentially. They'd go for pizza, they'd go for movies, they both enjoyed each other's company. And the thing was that, again, the cultural differences were huge here. And he was very much from a background of arranged marriages. You know, when you met somebody that would be your partner for life kind of thing. So he was going into it of the mindset of that, whereas the mindset of casually seeing people, casually dating people, casually having sexual relations with people, it was just completely different. So his way of thinking was not the same as Tatiana's way of thinking. He started thinking that this was a really serious relationship when actually, in fact, it wasn't. Tatiana was giving off all the signs that it was fleeting, you know, it wasn't very serious. She wasn't really interested in a romantic love at that moment in time, but she was curious about him, so she spent time with him. But he was taking them as totally different. He didn't understand it, and because of the cultural issues and the stability of his mental health, he had never really dated women before, so he didn't really understand that, and he just misread everything that Tatiana was giving off. A couple of weeks go by after meeting Tatiana, and he's writing back to his family saying that the Tarasoff family were expecting him to express his feelings towards Tatiana and his intentions, which at that point, they didn't even essentially know that he existed. Tatiana, over time, grew more disinterested in him, and unfortunately, his was very opposite. Like, she grew more disinterested, and his feelings for her grew more and more intense. He started showing up everywhere she was, at her house, at the bus stop. He would call her all the time, basically exhibiting stalking behaviour. He then sunk into a depression and would often stay inside alone a lot, would skip school. He really had these feelings for Tatiana, he wanted to spend time with her and she just wasn't, so it really started to depress him. He ended up getting really desperate, so he befriends her brother Alex, who he actually ended up moving in with, so they would become roommates. Where they actually lived as roommates as well was very close to where Tatiana lived. It was with his brother, so he would see her more often, and they did sort of start spending a little bit more time together. He would actually tape conversations of Tatiana so that he could assess whether she liked him or not, I guess. Despite Tatiana spending a bit more time with him, she didn't think of him as a boyfriend. It wasn't like that at all. But she did kind of like the attention that he was giving her, and I mean, who doesn't? At the time, she really didn't know what he was capable of. I guess nobody would have. She didn't see any harm in it, but in fact, there was plenty of harm in it. He did actually scare her sometimes as well. Like, he showed her his journal where he wrote down every interaction with them, and one of them was actually titled "Taking My Girlfriend to the King of Hearts," which freaks her out a little bit. She told him that he was crazy and that he needed to relax, but honestly, she had no idea where it would lead up at all, and how dangerous that behaviour that he was exhibiting could have been, and was. Eventually, he sought help from a professional because his friend convinced him that he needed to. So, going through an emotional crisis, he went for psychological counselling at the University Medical Centre on campus. His therapist was a Dr. Lawrence Moore, and he would go sit down with Miss Dr. Moore and discuss everything, but most of it would be about Tatiana and his intention to kill her. Now, obviously, that really worried Dr. Moore. I believe he never actually named Tatiana, but it wasn't actually really difficult to decipher who he was talking about. On numerous times, Dr. Moore had wondered about whether he should break doctor-patient confidentiality because Prosenjit was threatening Tatiana's life, and yes, okay, he had the confidentiality issues where he was not allowed to tell anyone, but should he tell someone because his threats were coming increasingly more deranged. He said that he'd planned to buy a gun, that he would like to murder Tatiana. He was saying it all the time, and it really did worry Dr. Moore. He ended up going to 8 sessions, I believe, and obviously the doctor had basically said to him that if the death threats continued, he would have no choice but to hospitalize him. And unfortunately, he did actually think that the best predictor of future violence was past violence, and Prosenjit had not had any past violence. So with that in mind, and the fact that he didn't want to break confidentiality, he just didn't, I guess he didn't think that these threats were serious. He didn't know what to do. He knew he wanted to do something, but he didn't know what he could do. And so he just told him that he would give his word to stop basically these death threats and things like that. And Prosenjit said that he would, but then he just stopped going to counselling sessions altogether. And obviously Dr. Moore was left wondering what he should do. He went to another psychiatrist, like his supervisor, I believe, called Dr. Harvey Powell. They together wrote a letter to police on campus and basically explained everything about the death threats, things like that. So the campus police go over, they interview Prosenjit in his flat with Tatiana's brother there. And he just denied making any death threats at all. He then assured the police that he would just stay away from Tatiana and, that would be that. So they did do something. They did tell the police, but he denied it all. It was kind of just brushed over, I guess. They just believed him when he said that he would stop seeing her and just leave her alone. But he didn't, sadly. And then Dr. Powell, for some reason, ordered all the therapy notes that they had to be destroyed. I don't know why. Did they see that as an end to it? I have no idea. But unfortunately, Prosenjit did not stop stalking Tatiana, and it would end in tragedy. 2 months later, on the 27th of October in 1969, Prosenjit showed up at Tatiana's house with a pellet gun and a butcher's knife. When she asked him to leave, he said that he really needed to speak to her. He pulled out the pellet gun and she tried to run. Like, she tried legging it, but he shot her with a pellet gun into like her torso area, and then he dragged her back out onto the family's lawn. Tatiana was screaming. She lunged forward for him and he pulled out his 13-inch knife and he stabbed her multiple times to quiet her, as he would later tell the police. He then walks into the house, rang up the police and said to them, "I've just stabbed my girlfriend." When the police arrived, he kindly walked over to them, said, "Handcuff me, I killed her." And sadly, that was the case. Tatiana was taken to the hospital where she unfortunately was pronounced as deceased a short time later. Prosenjit Padar attempted to plead guilty to manslaughter, but he did actually go on trial for first-degree murder. I don't know why he wasn't found guilty of first-degree murder, but he wasn't. He was found guilty of second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to that for that. He was actually served 5 years, and then an appeal was made on behalf of him on the grounds that the jury had been inadequately instructed, and a new judge actually accepted that and decided that he could be released under the terms that he would be basically sent back to India and never return, and he did. He returned to Calcutta. He apparently found a new wife and has a family over there. He murdered Tatiana and only ended up serving 5 years in prison for it. I get he's no longer in the country, but I don't know. I don't know what my thoughts are on that. I'd like to know what your thoughts are on that. As you can imagine, Tatiana's parents were very angry at all of this. Those 2 doctors, psychiatric doctors, knew of the threat to their daughter's life, and they never told the family, they never told Tatiana. And they felt like essentially if they were told that, possibly the daughter could still be with them. And it could be the case, because I know stalking, even if they know that, you know, they're being stalked or that their life might be in danger, it could still end in tragedy, and it does often. But Tatiana didn't see that danger at all, and nor did her family. Maybe if she did, she wouldn't be going around with her brother and chilling out with him. He wouldn't have even been living with her brother. Maybe that distance would have stopped it all. I'm not saying that it could. It might not have. It might still have ended in tragedy, but it just gave them a chance where before there was none, basically, because she just didn't have a clue the danger that she was in at all. Anyway, the parents filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the University of California, and a Supreme Judge did actually rule that it is a therapist's moral and professional obligation to report threats such as those, like threats to life, in order to protect those individuals. The judge actually wrote, "The protective privilege ends where the public peril begins." And that is how Tatiana's case changed things. If a therapist now believes that a patient intends to commit a crime that will result in harming another person, they have an obligation to report that to the authorities, to the person, to the family, in order to protect them. It's actually now a crime not to do that, and is a standard feature of psychiatric care nowadays, when in fact it wasn't before. Because the case with Tatiana, they didn't want to break confidentiality rules. They knew what, you know, the rules that they had, that they could not break them, and they just didn't know what to do. The duty to warn, as it is now referred to, basically came to fruition because of Tatiana's case. She was just 20 years old when her life was taken by a man that was obsessed with her, when all she wanted to do was casually date, casually spend a bit of time, and then go the separate ways, whereas he just had all these other ideas of it. The stalking behaviour just got worse and worse, and Tatiana lost her life as a result of it, which is absolutely devastating. I am glad that her case did change things for the better, but it's heartbreaking that that wasn't a feature before, because maybe it could have obviously made a massive difference in this case. But yeah, that is the end of the case. If you guys have enjoyed this video, give me a big thumbs up, subscribe to the channel for similar content. Anyway, that's all I have today on the case of Tatiana Tarasoff. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye.